Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you very much for the this esteemed foundation for this kind invitation on such short notice, actually. And my gratitude to all the friends that made this discussion possible under very strict time limitations. I come to you from a very difficult situation. I have been traveling for now over 3 weeks, I think, to over maybe 9 countries, trying to do the liaison and the discussions to try to overcome the political impasse that we've been having, which I will explain in a moment. And just as we speak, the Qaeda forces that are legitimized by the Presidential Council and the Government of National Accord, directly or indirectly, which is recognized by the UN and the US government and everyone else, have managed to take 2 of the most important oil installations in Libya. So there is an ongoing fight. The Libyan National Army is amassing to try to push them back. So we are in the midst of a fight. And this discussion comes at a very opportune time, because not only because the parliament, the elected parliament, and under the authority of its head, the Honorable Aguila Saleh, are worried and have asked me to convey their views and their perspective to the new American administration, but also the fact that right now, if we don't manage to stabilize the country, we do risk a major civil war again in Libya. So it's a very risky and difficult situation, and I am grateful for the friends that made this trip possible and made this discussion possible. I also thank Pete, who's a dear friend and someone for whom I have great respect, and I learn a great deal from for this historical perspective, because it is very important. But I would also like to caution that we shouldn't think of the Gaddafi period as the good times and then this period as the bad period, because I was there in the revolution. I joined the revolution on the 2nd day of it. And I remember that it was genuinely a popular uprising. It wasn't just an Islamist conspiracy, and it wasn't a foreign conspiracy. There was definitely a popular uprising. I would also, however, agree that the revolution was, as many revolutions do, was very early hijacked by Muslim Brotherhood and Qaeda elements. And I myself suffered the marginalization and the pushing aside by these elements. I was, in fact, the head of the Libya stabilization team that wrote the post-revolutionary stabilization plan. But as soon as we got to Tripoli and managed to put the electricity back, the water back, get the fuel supply in order, and so on, I was quickly, with my 70-man team and woman team, pushed aside because the Islamists pressurized the then head of the NTC and the head of the transitional executive office to basically tell us, thank you very much, great work, submit now everything to the ministries and go away. And I had a very difficult choice at that time. Do you revolt against the head of the NTC after such a dreadful process of revolution, or do you abide and basically try to go along with the government, hoping that there was enough resistance to Islamist ideas and Muslim Brotherhood ideas that the country would bounce back? I went back to my job. I was the first ambassador of the National Transitional Council in the UAE. And I went back to my ambassadorial work, stayed involved in fighting Islamists throughout these 5 years of office. As a matter of fact, I think many of them see me as one of their key opponents, and on a weekly basis do character assassination, and I hope not physical assassination, you know. I think maybe because I've been out of range. But the sad story of Libya is that we're always being given false dichotomies. It isn't, the choice shouldn't be between fascists of the military type, as we suffered for 42 years under Gaddafi, or fascists of the Islamist type. I think the Libyans, like you, aspire for the same things you aspire for. They aspire for liberty and the pursuit of happiness, as the founding fathers would say. And instead of getting liberty, we have even more tyranny now under Islamist rule. And instead of the pursuit of happiness, we've fallen into misery. The Libyan people are suffering greatly, have continued to suffer greatly, and their conditions have worsened. That's why trauma is in the title of this discussion. The Libyan people are traumatized. The numbers of killings and kidnappings and maiming and the rise of prices, the collapse of the health system, collapse of the education system, the fuel shortages, the prices skyrocketing, all of these combine to have a very traumatic situation for the Libyan people. And their choice should not be either stay under Islamist rule, which we currently have, especially in Tripoli and in the western part of the country, or to replace that with a military rule. We want civilian oversight, we want civilian rule, we want democracy, we want the dignity of the human being, human rights in the most sacred sense of them, and the rights of man, as the expression goes, and woman. And we're not getting there. And we're not getting there because of deliberate sabotage. This foundation here is part of state building. It's based on the idea that the building of a country doesn't end, that every generation has a responsibility to continue to build the nation. And in building the nation, you need to be rooted in your tradition and the vision of the founding fathers. But you also need to be open-ended and open to new ideas and expand the principles of the founding fathers. So you continue to try and help to build the nation. And this foundation has had a very important role in advising the Trump administration and is helping to actually build the Trump team, and has a lot of say in terms of advising, especially in policy terms, to the new administration. One of the key issues, has been the policy that Pete has mentioned earlier, which is the commitment, the early commitment of the previous administration to making things work with the Muslim Brotherhood and to actually seeing them as the key allies in rebuilding Libya. The problem with the Muslim Brotherhood is that it's actually a transnational organization with transnational aspirations. It's as simple as that. To build a country, you need people who are committed to the nation state. That's very basic, I know, but it's very important to bear in mind. You cannot have partners in the building of a nation who don't believe in the state, but only believe in being parasitical on it to build their transnational agenda. Libya, over the last 6 years, spent something to the tune of $200 billion, of which the Libyan people have seen hardly anything. No new hospitals, no new roads, no new schools. Where did the money go? The money went to building the resources of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Libyan Fighting Group, which is the name of the Libyan branch of Qaeda. And Qaeda noticed what I would call the tagging syndrome that the UN and the US have, unfortunately, which is to designate groups by the tag. So if they change their name, they're no longer chased. So we had this, and this is, I know it sounds very simple and very strange, but it's happening every day. So in Syria, you're actually arming Qaeda just because they changed their name. And I saw this horrific video of someone wearing Osama bin Laden clothing, saying that they are no longer associated with Qaeda and their name is this such and such name. And the guy is, even in his attire, basically wearing the exact clothes of Osama bin Laden with the exact flag behind him, the black flag and so on. And yet he's renamed and all of a sudden he's okay. In Libya, we had this phenomenon, which was called Ansar al-Sharia. And they used the black flag. They talked like bin Laden, believed the same doctrines as bin Laden, the same Salafist, jihadist, what I consider heretical doctrine. And they were called Ansar al-Sharia, and all of a sudden they were tolerated in Benghazi, and they were tolerated in Sirte, and they were allowed to fester in Sirte for years, And I personally came, because I was also National Security Advisor to Abdullah Thani, the Prime Minister in the East. I came to this country several times, 2013, 2014, 2015, warning that the Islamists are taking over and that they are making Libya into their ATM machine, and into their fueling station or gas station, and into a platform that will threaten the entire region, including Europe. I basically didn't get any attention except from Muslim Brotherhood lobbyists who are in Washington, who kept calling me warmongering and divisive and not inclusive enough. And this doctrine of false inclusivity is very important. It's a very, very important mistake that people make. We're told to be inclusive, but I ask you, can German democracy survive the inclusion of Nazis? Can Italian democracy survive the inclusion of fascists, of the Mussolini type? Can Spanish democracy survive the Franco type of fascism? It can't, because you're trying to insert into the structure that leads to the rise of the state elements that are antithetical to the rise of the nation state, because they have transnational agendas. Nazi Third Reich ambitions and racist policies cannot be reconciled with German democracy. And that is why in the German constitution, it specifically stamps out Nazism. But in the case of us in Libya, we kept being told by your own administration that we're supposed to be inclusive of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Libyan Fighting Group. And they were forced upon us again and again. Even as they lost every single election, we had two major elections. The Muslim Brotherhood and the Libyan Fighting Group combined, and all variations of Islamists, never got more than 5% of the vote. And yet, we were told to give them 50% of the power through power sharing mediated by the UN. Why? Because they happened to march on Tripoli when they lost their last election. So it is like Mussolini when he marched on Rome and assassinated his Marxist opponents and his leftist opponents, except this time they want us to bless our Mussolinis, okay? And under the UN flag, we were made to negotiate with these guys, being told to include them. What is the result? Through the Skhirat process, we ended up having a presidential council of 9 members who have to have consensus on anything, okay? Out of those 9 members, 2 declared Islamists, one jihadist, called Ammari, and another Muslim Brotherhood, declared Muslim Brotherhood called Kajman, and then a variety of others who were not able to resist them, either through being under their influence or under their threat. And then the government, this presidential council, was forced to go into Tripoli under Islamist militia protection, okay? So this is an Islamist infiltrated presidential council living under Islamist militia protection, okay? Furthermore, to add insult to injury, they appointed a defense minister who actually celebrated Qaeda figures like Ismail al-Salabi, okay, and went to inspect the troops in Jufra, okay, in the south, and actually ended up blessing a man called Cherkasy who led, up to now, 7 attacks on Benghazi and on the Oil Crescent. The head of the Presidential Council is a friend of mine. I kept urging him, appealing to him. I said, look, if you can't resist these guys, at least remove the legitimacy from them. Because in its wisdom, the United Nations, with the full, of course, cooperation of the United States, the UK, the Italians, the French, recognized the Presidential Council and still recognize the Presidential Council. And even last week your embassy in Tunis issued a statement of support, a joint statement of support for Presidential Council. But no one pays attention to the infiltration. How can you bless and support a defense minister of a government of national accord that actually supports Qaeda? Okay, and this is not fiction, this is documented. They took their photographs together. The Mufti, who's our kind of Mullah Umar, okay, they're the equivalent of Taliban, these guys, okay, in the Afghanistan situation. The Mufti kept urging, even this week, he said, you must do jihad in Benghazi. You have to go and attack Benghazi and do jihad in Benghazi. And no one says anything. Like, sanctions were imposed against the head of our parliament, and yet no sanction was ever imposed against this Mufti, who is our Mullah Umar, basically, okay? So even though he actually advocated bloodshed, he advocated attacks, okay? So we have this weird phenomenon, okay, of the most sinister elements in our country, sinister in that they are not interested in the country, because they took the money of the country and gave it to Syrian radical elements. And, ask yourself, where did ISIS get all the flashy new cars and equipment when they first rose? with the uniforms that matched, and everything was clean and organized. Big propaganda machine. Where did the money for all this come? And the money came from Libya. The logistical support came from Turkey that allowed them to pass through very easily, and that actually gave medical care to their fighters and facilitated the passing of weaponry into Syria. So we're asked to form a democracy with these guys, okay? And when we object, and I think I was the most vocal in objecting to all this, we get accused of not being interested in democracy enough and not being democratic and not being inclusive. I was in Algeria last week, and I told the Algerian officials, I find it weird that when you do the dialogue sessions, that I see at the table 5 Islamists, one of whom has only 2 members in his party, and I see that entire tribes of Libya, like the Tarhuna, who are about 600,000 people, or the Urshafana, who are about 500,000 people, or the Urfalla, who are about 700,000 people, completely absent and unrepresented. Why? Because they don't go along with the UN contention that we must have this so-called inclusive process. So this false inclusivity has led to the infiltration of the Libyan state. You know, despite all the chaos that you see in Libya today, there are certain stable points that never changed since 2011. Most importantly, the Central Bank of Libya governor, the head of the financial controlling ministry or authority, and the deputy head of the defense ministry, deputy head of the interior ministry. They never changed throughout these years. And they always stayed with Muslim Brotherhood. They always stayed with the Libyan fighting group. How can the state rise when the very joints of the country, the state, the nation, are actually held by people who don't believe in the nation state? So I believe in the inclusivity that sets certain conditions about being included. To be included, you must not exclude others unfairly. And to be included, you must be a citizen, in the sense of being someone who is interested in the rise of the country. So, having not been heard in 2013, 14, and 15, I am hoping that the change that you have just had in this country may open the way to perhaps a reconsideration of your policies. Because quite frankly, someone asked me, a friend of mine, what would you ask America to do for you? I said, we don't want anything from them. We don't want your soldiers to fight our fight. We don't want your money. Libya is rich enough. We don't want you to actually help us in any way. All we want you is to just relook at your policy. This crazy policy which undermines your own interests, okay? Of actually supporting Muslim Brotherhood and Libyan fighting group elements who are not only undermining Libya, but because they're undermining and destabilizing my country, are a threat to your country. So the Libyan people want dignity like all other people. The Libyan people want to live freely, to live happily, to enjoy the wealth of their country equally. That's what Libyans want. And that's what Libyans didn't get. And forgive me, but part of the reason they didn't get that was every time we tried to push the Islamists back, somehow we were forced to let them be active by the international community itself. So I am hoping that this foundation, which is so key, and which has the capacity to articulate and has the connectivity to get a listening from the new administration, I think it's time to revamp your Libya policy big time. And experts who are experienced deeply with the situation of the past, like Pete, can actually contribute to this a great deal. I actually would sincerely hope that Pete would accept being an envoy to Libya, or because we need someone like him. And there are some people here in Washington who know what's going on. We need someone to hold the Libya file, because not only are the Europeans confused about certain points, but they're having the elections. And these elections will lead to confusion and instability in their own policies for the foreseeable future. The Italians have theirs, the French have theirs, the British just had that change. So it's extremely important that America has a leading role in all this. But it has to be a role based on a reconsideration of what's going on. This is very painful for me, and perhaps some of my difficulty in speaking today is because of the pain I actually feel. I remember that in 2011, I walked into Ambassador Stevens' office. And as I was walking to see him, I was the head of the stabilization team at the time, in the Tbilisi hotel. He had his embassy in the same hotel I was staying in. And as I walked in, I saw these Islamist leaders sitting in the waiting area. So I went in and I said, Ambassador, before we discuss anything, may I warn you that the very guys sitting in your waiting area are a threat to you. He said, no, these are part of the katibas we're using for protection of the embassy. Okay. Now the Benghazi disaster, its real reason is precisely this policy of trusting the Muslim Brotherhood and the Libyan Fighting Group. And your ambassador was killed by these people, not by anyone else. And when the Libyan people of Benghazi, the young women and men actually went out and demonstrated, many Americans don't know this, but young women and men of Benghazi went out to demonstrate in what was called the Benghazi Friday. They went out to demonstrate and they actually physically pushed the militias out of Benghazi without weapons. They lost a good number of people, but they actually pushed them like they're massive demonstrations against the killers of the ambassador. Guess what happened after that? The leadership of Libya, the Islamist leadership of Libya, showed up in Benghazi, and on a platform, the photo is there, okay, with the militia leaders, okay, said that it was wrong to push these militias out because they're legitimate. And your administration at the time failed to say, no, these young people represent what America stands for. They're Jeffersonian, they follow Lincoln, okay, in their aspirations. And you guys are the ones who killed our ambassador. No one held them accountable at the time, and they got away with it. It was that abandonment of the aspirations of the Libyan revolution that has led to all the disasters that we have seen. Today I talk to you here, and the only source of income of the Libyan people has been attacked by what's called Saraya Benghazi, okay, the Benghazi Defense Brigades. This is headed by a man called Sharkasi, in total alliance with the Qaeda Ismail Salabi and his affiliates, and with the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood militias of what's called the Duru of bin Hamid and others, okay? And this is the most painful part, having been inspected, okay, in a troop inspection by the defense minister called Barghati, who's the defense minister of the government of national accord of the Presidential Council, recognized by the United States of America and by the UN. And whenever we want to change this Presidential Council, and I will readily admit, I'm trying to replace the Presidential Council, okay? And I am one of the contenders for this post. When we try to change the Presidential Council, we told, no, you have to really be patient and you have to be inclusive. And as we are being patient and inclusive, these guys are attacking the oil terminals and attacking Benghazi. They tried 3 times to attack Benghazi. And thank God for the air power of the Libyan National Army and its determination. It's been fighting terrorists for 3 years without any international support. As a matter of fact, with international undermining, okay? And they've pushed back the Islamists out of Benghazi in a dreadful 3-year fight that has cost us something like 6,000 young people, okay? And yet no one is helping the Libyan National Army, and they're standing by as a Qaeda army is being blessed by the UN and the US into attacking the East. So there was a good statement yesterday that called for cessation of hostilities. But the way the statement is written, it actually equates the Libyan National Army with Qaeda troops, okay? So the policy is still there because of the new administration hasn't had a chance to revamp all the policies and to change the various embassy staff and so on. So we're still going on the previous administration's policy, okay? I came to Washington to urge you to quickly relook at what you're doing to us, because you're not only not helping the army, you're actually undermining our attempt to replace the Presidential Council by simply following the blind policy of saying that this is the legitimate government of Libya. Another very key area is the Central Bank of Libya. I tried 12 times submitting evidence, okay, that the central bank governor and some of his staff are actually facilitating the arming of Islamist militias by giving them trade finance. Today, if the central bank gives you $10 million, you can go out in the black market and make them $70 million, dinars, sorry. Instead of, because the official rate is supposed to be 1-to-1, the black market rate is 1-to-7. Okay, so you can imagine by opening trade finance to chosen Islamist companies, you can finance everything. And we're being killed by our own money, okay? Because of the central bank governor. I complained to the previous administration, and several times, documented, okay? And not only did they not do anything about it, they said you should not undermine the governor because there's what they call the de-risking process that could shut the banking system down. I was saying, what more risking can there be than to have an Islamist governor or an Islamist facilitating governor, you know? So this governor was fired by the legitimate parliament in the East 2 years ago. We haven't been allowed to implement the removal of the governor because his signature is the only signature recognized by your financial system. Because, as you know, we trade in dollars, so everything has to be recognized in New York, okay? So if I'm to be asked, what do we need from America, is just wake up to what's been happening. You have been advocating Muslim Brotherhood, Libyan fighting group for the last 6 years, and you're still expecting us to rise as a nation. That is like saying to the Germans, allow the Nazi party, give the central bank to the Nazi party, but you must have German democracy. That just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So please reconsider the policy. Please urgently appoint an envoy, a special envoy to Libya that can hold this file. Please stay as leaders of the file. Don't give it to any of the regional or European powers because they're all going through their own instabilities. And we need a clear defense of basically Jeffersonian democracy in Libya. So the choice is not either a Gaddafi type of rule or Islamist rule. The choice, the third choice, and the choice for which I went out to the streets in 2011, and so did many young people, is the choice of liberty and the equality and the pursuit of happiness. That is what we want, and I think such a third choice does exist. And there are enough young people and women and men. We're working with the tribes, the social fabric of Libya. They all want this. We're working with women groups and held several conferences organized by the Libyan Institute for Advanced Studies, and that's what we hear from them. We hear the same things from youth, be they city youth or village or tribal youth, and we have a group of elders and women leaders coming to the UN to explain just that next week, inshallah. I hope maybe you can get a chance to hear them out. And I can tell you that the Libyan people just want a good and free life. And you need to look again at the policy that you have been pursuing. I am sorry, due to the time restriction, there's so much to cover, but these are the basic things I wanted to say. And I'll be more than happy to document for you any of the claims that I have made. Thank you very much. God bless you.